Great. Well, good evening and welcome. My name is Paul Glatter. I'm a professor at the King's College and a program chair of the Journalism, Culture, and Society major, as well as the director of the McCandlish Phillips Journalism Institute. And this is our annual spring lecture series. In fact, it's our 7th annual MPGI lecture. It is our first ever Zoom lecture in this series. And I'm excited because Gary Fong is a person who we were going to have give this lecture last year around this time. In fact, I happened to be in San Francisco at a college journalism conference a couple weeks before he was supposed to come out. And we were walking near the ferry building, if I recall, along the Embarcadero. And I remember this pandemic was looming. And sure enough, it got worse, as we all know, and we had to postpone that event. But you know what? It's 1 year later. We've come a long way, and we are online now. And I'm really glad that we can do this event with Gary tonight. And I promised Gary that we will still bring him to New York sometime to meet our students. And I look forward to that. But tonight, this actually works out well when we're hearing about photography and seeing photography, because I think on our own devices, our computers and using Zoom, the images should render pretty well. So I look forward to that. And before we welcome Gary, I want to tell you just a few things about him, which hopefully you read as well. Gary Fong is the former director of photography at the San Francisco Chronicle and an award-winning photojournalist. He now serves as the chief photography officer at WeArePhotographers and is the founder of the Genesis Photo Agency. As a photojournalist, Fong had been awarded the San Francisco Bay Area Photographer of the Year 5 different times. He was the California Press Photographer of the Year 2 times, the San Francisco Press Club Picture of the Year award twice, and numerous other awards with the National Press Photographers Association, which is a great association, by the way. I hope all the students here join that. His work, you may have seen it. It's been in Time Magazine, Newsweek, Life Magazine, Moody Monthly, Decision, Associated Press, New York Times, LA Times, and other places. He's been a judge for the Pulitzer Prize in Photography, the National Press Photographers Photographer of the Year competition, and he's received a host of other professional and collegiate photographic competitions across the country. And he's taught some photojournalism at both UC Berkeley in the Bay Area and at San Francisco State University. And so that's some of his background. I look forward to hearing more. And Gary, we're just glad to have you with us tonight. And we look forward to hearing your words and seeing your images. So welcome.
Thank you. I wish I could see all you guys in person, but this pandemic is just giving us problems. You hear me all right? Give me a high sign or something and let me know that if I'm not doing anything right. Okay, good. I saw some of the names come through and I'm very familiar with you guys, and those of you who I know, you know that I pray for you often, but I wish I could see you because I miss you all. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about pictures and about how it affects, how what we do affects history and sometimes changes. So let me share my screen right now. You guys let me know that I'm doing okay. All right. Do you know who these people are? This is about the 1950s, in the 50s, probably about the time that I was born. Maybe I was about 9 or 10 o'clock. But a lot of young people in college or young people don't know who these people are. And one of them is Marilyn Monroe. And then a lot of people don't know who the other guy is, but you probably recognize him by name as Joe DiMaggio. They were in San Francisco one day. They decided to get married at City Hall in a civil marriage. And you see that little flash bulb down in the bottom left-hand corner. This is a time when 4x5s and press photographers were using 4x5s and flash bulbs at the time. There was no toning cord, no 35 at the time. But the point is that a lot of people, let's see here. These people were as well known on the planet as any other person in the world. I mean, you could say Marilyn Monroe, you can say Joe DiMaggio, and people will recognize their name. It's like the couple of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, during these days. So it was just a moment in time that Chronicle photographers were there and made these pictures. And it was just an innocent time. Two people getting married, two people were in love. This next set of pictures is Vince Majora got word, and a writer got word that the Indians were going to Alcatraz. And if you don't know what Alcatraz is, it's an island prison in the middle of San Francisco Bay, and they abandoned it. There used to be a lot of prisoners there. Al Capone was one of them, who was a resident there until they moved everybody off, closed the prison. The prison was closed for several years, and the Indians decided that they were, since the federal government was no longer using the land and it was surplus land, they were going to take their land back, because it was stipulated in some kind of an agreement that they would the land would resort back to the Indians. So about 50 of them boarded a boat and took off to land on the island and take it over and occupy it. And they occupied it for about 19 months. During this 19 months, all the news media started getting wind of it, that the Indians were Native American Indians were taking over the island and taking it back and claiming it for their own. So they stayed on the island. They were brought food into the island and supplies by boat whenever they needed to. This is Richard Oakes on the left, and his daughter. He brought his daughter there, and she ended up dying there. And they think one of their tribe members had a beef with Richard Oakes, and ended up killing the daughter, so to speak. And they never really, I don't think they really found out who or what. But anyway, that's part of the story. But they stayed on the island for about 19 months, and there was nothing to do. They just kind of sat around and waited, and they claimed the land. They wrote up on the Alcatraz signage there that it was Indian land and all Indians are welcome, and this is what they were going to take over. The next story is about the motorcycles. After World War II, a bunch of World War II bomber pilots and crew who were mechanically adept, loved to get into motorcycles, and they started all these motorcycle rallies. And one of them ended up in Hollister. So many of them that they took over this little town. There was only like a handful of police officers there at the time. They had to bring in some from the outside areas and be able to control the crowds, which they could control the crowds because they were completely outnumbered. So the bikes would run up and down the streets. They would run through the bars, run in and out of the bars, and everybody would laugh except the bar owners, didn't like it. And they kept, more people kept coming, and local citizens kept coming, and this town soon got taken over. Barney Peterson went up there from the Chronicle, shot this picture that ended up in Life magazine. about these rowdy bikers that took over a town. And that started a whole movement where there was a movie made about the Wild Ones with Marlon Brando. And that movie helped move people to a social group where they had underground outlaw biker groups. One of them was the Hells Angels. So from this one picture, just kind of everything manifested into this social motorcycle group and gangs that started popping up all over the country and then around the world. So this one picture in Life magazine kind of started that whole revolution. You recognize this picture. It's a Joe Rosenthal picture from World War II. It was a flag raising of Iwo Jima. And when the US military took over the island so they can use it as a base to continue the war to Japan, take the war back to Japan. Now, during this time, Joe, was with the Marines and shooting for Associated Press at the time. He shot this picture, and it started. He shot the picture. I work with Joe at the San Francisco Chronicle. He tells me all kinds of stories. I don't know if I can tell them all, but one of them was he's so short that he had to pile up a couple big rocks so he can stand on it to shoot this picture because the angle was wrong on it. So he shot the picture. The process is this is on 4x5 film, by the way, and there's on a holder, you got a front and back on the holder. So you have two frames on a holder. He shoots this picture. He shoots this picture, puts the holder in his bag. He has to walk all the way back down to the beach, which is miles downhill. And then he has to get a transport to get that film to the ship. The ship has to put it on transport to get to London. And then from London, it goes to the Associated Press office to process. And then, and this takes weeks, by the way. I mean, it's not cellular or satellite technology, and they can't send it by radio. So they send it by, they get it to London, they process it, and they're looking at these two frames. And they say, Joe, is this a picture set up? They're asking about this picture. And they send a radio message back to the ship, writes it down. They get the message back up to Joe weeks later, wherever he is on the island, and ask him, is this a picture that's set up? And Joe is thinking about this picture when AP London is thinking about this picture. And then they started wondering, well, is it set up? And Joe writes back a note, which goes all the way back down to the beach, to the ship, to radio, to London, and say, well, of course it's set up because Joe's thinking about this one, but this one is not set up. He tells me, says they put the flag on, they replaced the old flag and put the new flag, the larger flag on, and then the soldiers ramped it up. This picture ran in every other American newspaper in the country, and then went around the world. This story is about Operation Lionheart by Deanne Fitzmaurice. And it's about a 9-year-old Iraqi boy during the war. He got mixed up with a landmine in his neighborhood and severe injuries, and his dad took him to this U.S. hospital that was set up in the desert. So his dad was with him all the time, the entire time his son was being cared to by U.S. military. And then the doctor said, we can do so much here at the base, at the hospital in the desert, but we want to fly him to Germany. And so the doctors can continue the operations and continue. And his father was saying, you know, thanking, praise Allah for this opportunity for, you know, them to take care of his son. So he went to Germany. He got medical attention, and he was recovering. And they decided to send him to Oakland, where Deanne picked up the story. And Deanne just followed the father and the son, through their recovery of this. And it was a very touching story that, you know, his dad was so dedicated to his son, and his son was so severely injured during the war that the only way that he would survive would be to get immediate and qualified medical attention. So during the time that he stayed in Oakland, you know, a lot of the hospital people started to get to know him. He was there for months, and he was well enough to get up and play a little soccer with some of the hospital staff. And but they needed funds, and they had some fundraising for him to stay in the country, or have some funds to you know, buy food and things for their stay here in the United States. And his dad took a job as a custodian at the hospital itself, so he could stay closer to his father, or closer to his son, so his father could be with his son all the time. He was there so long recovering that he you know, started some artwork that he did, and then he started going to school, and you know, he was so disformed that, you know, all of his classmates wanted to know what happened, and so he would tell them what happened. He would make some friends, good friends, because, you know, you talk to kids, and, you know, they're good at making friends, no matter what you look like, or where have you been, or who you are. You know, friends are friends. And then he finally got enough money and help from the government to set themselves up in an apartment in Oakland, to live and to stay and continue visiting the hospital. But it was very hard for Salah that, you know, people would see him all disfigured, and they would just kind of turn away, and you know, they didn't want to talk to him very much. And there was a point that he just broke down. He's cried a lot, and the dad didn't know what to do, and, you know, he knew he just wanted to see his mom again, you know, way, you know, thousands of miles away, across on the other side of the world. So one day, the U.S. government allowed Salah's sister and mother and rest of their family immigrate to the United States. So Deanne flew to Iraq during this transition, so they can get them, you know, transitioning over to the United States to get connected with their family again. So they arrived at SFO, San Francisco Airport, and there was an excitement in Salah and his dad's life, and they just saw the parents, and saw the mom and the sisters, and they just hugged them right at the airport. You know, it was just kind of a, you know, that love story of being reunited again. You know, there was dancing in the house, in the apartment, and they loved being there. You know, they would share a meal together and laugh like old times. And it was just those moments where it you know, it all came together. And, you know, I have to say, if we did anything right in Iraq, it's one of them was taking care of this young man, because he's a genuine nice guy, nice young man. I can't remember how old he is right now, but he's probably a older teenager by now. But it was Deanne Fitzmaurice. We ran these series of pictures, and she won a Pulitzer Prize for this series pictures of Salah. Now, many of you have heard about the Hurricane Katrina several years ago in New Orleans. It was unprecedented. The freeways flooded, the lower parts of the city flooded out. People had to leave the flooded areas. They didn't know where to go. The radio announcer said, go to the Superdome or whatever stadium they had out there, and people just kept arriving, and they didn't have anything to do. They didn't have any supplies, or they had they just had places to sit, get out of the sun, and it just, people just kept coming, and there for days, and they were there for a week. The media at this time was talking about and showing pictures every day about the tragic situation here. There was no aid coming from FEMA or any of the local governments about food or care or help. People started to break into some of the stores just to get food to eat and supplies, and it was it was a very traumatic time for them. They kept calling for help, asking for help, and the media kept publishing pictures about this, about all the tragedies and the heartaches that were happening in New Orleans at this location where no aid was coming. People and then the government, local government started to react, and they sent some people to help control the crowds, basically, and trying to get them aid and food. And I think some of the humanitarian relief agencies like Samaritan's Purse and Billy Graham's group came out to help. There was, it was so tragic in New Orleans that people would be dead on the street from exposure, and no one came to claim to pick up the bodies. No ambulance was available. So these neighbors had this guy sitting out here dead on the street, and decided, well, it's starting to smell, so they had to bury him right there on the street. And this is how tragic it was. And the media kept telling government, you got to do something, you got to move something. And we kept working on the story. That we had a team of 4 photographers there, and they were all over the city working on the story, transmitting back to the paper. And people didn't know where to go. They stayed in their flooded out homes. They didn't have any place to go. They couldn't go down to the stadium because there was no room down there. So a lot of them stayed at home. Well, some of the rescue guys came out and said, brought them a little bit of supplies, not a lot, but just trying to help best they can. But this was the city for weeks at the time. Michael Maycor got up on one of the owner's residence and photographed him standing in his yard. Well, a month later, this is what it looks like. It finally, water subsided and was released and everything, and was just, just one of those, the water finally dissipated. But this is some of the debris that was been piled up. I think it's about 7 stories high. And this is what the hurricane did to some of the poles, some of the utility poles during the hurricane that came through. And then they had these people coming in from flying in to rescue some of the pets that were starving, and that was, they were lost. They didn't have a home. They're domestic pets, and they collected as many as they could. And then they flew them to animal shelters across the country and tried to get them homes and hold them for their owners. They put their, dog mugshots up online so they can, hopefully their owners will see them and claim them. But during the, during the coverage that I did in San Francisco, it boils down to, it's really the people that you meet along the way that I really liked about pictures, about doing coverage. One of them was this young lady. This is right after Reagan was elected president, and she was such a Reagan fan that she had posted 104 pictures in her apartment of Ronald Reagan, new President Ronald Reagan. So we were just doing stories about the new president, and she was one of the characters that we found. But San Francisco has a lot of unique characters. One of them was in Berkeley when I was teaching at Berkeley. I'd always have a camera with me just because you never know who you're going to run into. And it was during finals time on campus. And I saw this guy climbing all the way across from one staircase to the other staircase, back and forth. And I watched him for a little while, and I talked to him a little bit, and he says, yeah, I needed a break from studying on finals. So I decided, I'm going to go to Yosemite to do some climbing later after finals. But I'm getting in some exercise and some practice now during finals. And if you have ever, you young people, or maybe old people too, have gone through finals, and sometimes you're studying so much, and including this pandemic, you're like cooped up in your house or wherever you are in the dorm room, and you're like climbing walls to get out because you're so frustrated about either studying or being cooped up so much. So that's the way he felt. He felt cooped up, that he was climbing walls, literally climbing walls. So I shot this picture of him, and we used it in the paper. We had a story about the deer population was exploding on Angel Island, which is another island in San Francisco, because years before, there was a complaints about the mountain lions eating deer on the island. So they complained so much that they decided to trap the mountain lions and take them off the island because they didn't want to hurt the deer. Well, that threw the ecology balance off, because once you have the predator gone, that would take up all the old deer, so to speak. They had a deer population explosion that the deer was starving at this time. So at 5 o'clock, when the whistle blew for the last ferry to leave the island, the deer would hear it, come down to the picnic area and rummage through all the trash, and the Coast Guard would come out, and they would be there on the island 24/7, and they would come out and have dinner, and at that time the deer knew that the Coast Guard comes out and has dinner, and they sit at the picnic tables, and the deer thought they'd join them, and the Coast Guard just have to fend them off. But anyway, I was there watching this thing, and this, I think, illustrates the deer population, extremely well, that they're so hungry, they're not afraid of humans anymore for coming out for handouts. When we're out with pictures, with cameras, we're a witness to history. One of the witnesses to history is Michael Maycor at the Chronicle. We sent him to Iraq. We sent him there to do coverage of what our government was, our military was doing, what our tax dollars were doing. One morning, he was standing on a sand dune, minding his own business with a base that was set up by the military as a hospital base that he was with, a hospital group. And all of a sudden, all these helicopters start landing in his LZ. And off from this helicopters, where they're bringing off American and Iraqi wounded from an ambush in Nasiriyah. And this was one of the early conflicts in there that Americans were coming off and wounded. And he was there, and I got in that morning and I saw these pictures come in, and I called him on sat phone and said, "Michael, are you all right?" And he said, "Gary, it's surreal. I was standing on the sand dune minding my own business, and all these helicopters start landing in front of me, right in front of me, and they're pulling off American wounded and Iraqi wounded." And he says, "Was that from the Nasiriyah ambush?" And he said, yeah, it was." He says, "Yeah, I'm just hearing about it in the news this morning." And he said, "It is surreal. I've talked to CNN and told them a lot of things right now, uh, um, and I'm just, he was just blown away." He says, "All right, let me move these pictures around. I think they're going on A1 now. And I'll send them to Time and Newsweek." And Time and Newsweek picked them up. Time picked it up, and we did an exclusive with Time and ran the picture. This picture, 4-sided double truck. It was sent up from satellite to San Francisco. In the process of covering the war, every American, I think, was rummaging through all and every newspaper they can find for pictures of their soldiers, of their sons and daughters in the theater, in the Middle East theater. And because everybody was really frightened about what was going on over there, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of troops went over there just kind of instantly, so to speak. They put them on ships, they brought them over on planes, they set up bases there. And this is one of them, Hospitalman Sean Burton from Seattle, Washington. And we ran this picture in with the picture pages, and we sent it to AP. AP moved them around the world, and one of them landed. Yeah, I mean, these pictures, I don't know where they ran, but I got in one morning, the next morning after we ran this, so the day that we ran this, and I get a phone call, and it was a man, and he said, "Mr. Fong, I wanted to ask about this particular picture that you have in the paper." And I said, "Yeah, which one?" And he says, "It's one of a soldier that's under his jacket, Sean Burton." And I found the picture, and I said, yeah. He says, "Can you tell me when that picture was shot?" And he said, "I understand it was shot 24 hours ago. So it was shot yesterday in Iraq. It's satellite transmitted to us in San Francisco. We put it on the page for that yesterday's edition, and you're seeing it today." And he said, "Thank you, Mr. Fong, because I'm his dad. And I haven't heard from him for 2 months. Our family has not heard from him for 2 months because of radio silence during this war. Can you tell me anything about him?" And he says, "Well, it looks like our photographer, Michael Maycor, is probably with him or around him, because that's where he's stationed there he's embedded with that group." And he said, "Mr. Fong, thank you very much. We hadn't heard anything, and the first time we saw this picture and his name, we knew that he was safe, because he was not allowed to call out or to contact us or anything." And I says, "You're the dad?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Give me your address. I will make a print and ship it up to you, compliments of the Chronicle, and you just tell Sean when you see him the next time, you say, you talk to him on the phone or he comes back, you say, you make sure he does his duty, he stays safe, and he comes home. You tell that from me, because all those guys, need our support out there." So he said, "I will." And I said, "I'm going to put these pictures in the mail to you today with our compliments." Now, I'm going to say, at this time, at that moment, pictures and the way that it touched people across ethnic and religious lines and government, political lines. It didn't matter who you were. You were touched by a lot of these pictures by this war. And it like goes all the way back to simple pictures, happy pictures like the wedding of Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio. Historic pictures where the Indians take over Alcatraz and they try to make a statement that this land belongs to us. We were born on this land. We are the original Americans and we want our land back. I mean, that stayed with them. It made a lot of ripples through the news and government for a little while, but not for, it changed a little things, but not enough that the American Indians are still on these reservations. And Richard Oakes and his family, Richard was shot and killed, I think, by one of the tribesmen. I think his daughter there was some anger and some conflicts in the tribes that ended up losing his life, but he was an advocate for Indians and Indian rights. The one picture can start a whole social structure of outlaw motorcycle gangs. And if you see a lot of people riding Harleys, that comes from those, the history of those days when those bomber pilots loved to tinker things, and a lot of them were riding American bikes. But and all the way down to Joe Rosenthal's picture that stirred a nation, because at the time there wasn't a lot of funding coming through, and the U.S. was trying to get a lot of funding for the war effort. But when that picture ran, it started to generate a lot of funding for the U.S. war effort. It galvanized Americans together that said, yeah, we're there. We're there trying to stop the war and plant our flag where, in a country that we were at war with. Everything about the war cause changed because of that one picture, I think. But these pictures can have a tremendous amount of effect when you're doing coverage, and you don't know how long it's going to be until they have an effect. That's where pictures will stand. Some pictures will stand the test of time, and others may or may not. But when I got that call from Sean Burton's father, boy, it just really touched my heart, and kind of galvanized what we do as journalists and what we do as photographers when we're standing at the forefront of history, watching history unfold before us. I mean, it's an awesome responsibility, and it's it's a treasured a profession to be in. So let me close, and I hope you have some questions, because I actually am better with questions than I am with showing pictures. And one of these days, maybe I'll show some of the pictures that I did.
Gary, I want to, before we go to audience questions, I first want to thank you. This was, phenomenal to, so a comment first, that it was phenomenal to see still images again, and to see humanity and to feel humanity this way, in a different way than we have perhaps in the last year. I wanted to make one announcement that I forgot, and ask one question before we turn it over to audience questions. The announcement is on this issue of humanity again, by the way. Um, at our college in New York, we've got a 4-year major, a summer academy for high school students, and an NYC semester in journalism. And I noticed some of the people joining the call are from schools that send us students to those programs. And I'm heartened that this fall, by the way, the last 2 semesters, of course, we haven't had as many students coming to the visiting student program to study journalism and do journalism in New York. But this fall, we're nearing a full cohort. So there's a few slots left, but I'm excited that humanity seems to be returning. We're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel from the pandemic in some regards. And my team member Lauren is going to put some links for people in the chat if you want to apply to those kinds of things or follow us on social media. So that's, you could look for those there. To my question, Gary, we see so many videos going around now, and I'm just wondering your take on, are some of us in these older generations, did we get to experience a golden age of photojournalism? Um, what is photojournalism? What's the importance of photojournalism now? Why does still photography still matter?
It's still critical, and motion pictures, video is a different medium from stills. It's a different discipline in coverage. With a still picture, you're trying to encapsulate the entire story and the story elements in one image or a series of images that make, that are edited together. In video, you're doing something similar, but instead of getting everything in one image that expands the story, you're getting in several images and several takes, and you're editing for effect. I think with video and sound, it's a pretty good record. But these days, one of the things I'm worried about is falsifying the video, and that I think is really dangerous, and I've been kind of keeping my ears open for that, because in the early days of still photography during the war, even still photography, still pictures were manipulated, and like they erased people that were in the picture, or they added people that were in the picture during this meeting, so to speak, and stated that was fact. Well, once you compromise the integrity of the picture, you start asking yourself, is it a real picture? When Photoshop came out, that was a whole different arena. We at the newspaper industry, we use Photoshop for technical corrections, but not for manipulation. If we did for illustrations, that's a whole different issue about still pictures. But this manipulation of falsifying video and audio is real dangerous right now. That's what I'm kind of worried about. But did I answer your question? I might have gone off the target there.
No, definitely, and maybe other people want to unpack some of your answers there as well. I see some questions popping up in the chat, and I'm wondering if people are able to unmute themselves or not, or if I just need to read those when people post those. Steve Shriver is asking a question. Steve, are you able to unmute? I'm not sure. Okay, I wish we could hear everybody's voice. I'd love to actually hear where people are from, etc. But Steve is asking, Gary, are there images that you won't capture as a photojournalist? What are the boundaries of storytelling?
I would shoot it and then think about it later, because when you're doing coverage, you're in the heat of coverage. I don't know if I remember. I don't recall not shooting something for whatever reason. There maybe have a hesitancy for timing, and watching and waiting, or but I remember being chased out of a courtroom one time. So, but I would just basically do the coverage and then figure out the edit later, because if you're there, you know, to cover history, I mean, history just happens in front of you. So I would, but if you had, there's probably a specific question that you had on that, and I'd like to hear that before I qualify that. So there are probably reasons why I wouldn't cover something, but I can't think of it at the moment. You'll have to appreciate that my photographic coverage was during the mid 70s all the way through the late 80s. And then I went into a different arena. But I still shoot, I still do coverage, some coverage today, not a lot, not like I did it every day at the paper.
Okay, thank you, Gary. And Steve, if you have any follow-up, we've unmuted. When you ask a question, Lauren is unmuting the people so we can hear your voice and hear who you are and where you're from. So Steve, did you have any follow-up, or did Gary answer that? Okay.
Silence is deafening.
Yeah. We also have a question from Asher. Asher, are you able to ask your question and tell us?
Yeah, I can.
Great.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah. Hey, brother, how are you?
I'm good, and good to see your face and hear your thoughts. So my question for you as a photographer and as an editor, or someone who also select images from like millions of choices or whatever. So how do you approach? How do you find truth in the photograph? How you best judge the truth in the photograph? It's a very subjective question, but I just want to hear what your thoughts about it.
Did you say how I determine truth in the picture, or how I determine what the story's about?
Truth in the photo. Well, so I'm talking about like narrative, or it can be taken in different ways. Yeah.
Well, I'm usually going for the story and the edit. The story elements I'm looking for in the picture, and I'm assuming that all the pictures I'm looking at, because they're coming from most of them are coming from journalists with integrity, that they're all basically truthful. And accurately reported and accurately shot, so there's no manipulation. If I see something that I have questions about, like it may have been manipulated, Photoshop, so to speak, or it may be a false timing, in other words, a picture from the day before rather than today, I will call the photographer and ask him, says, can you verify or look at the metadata and verify the timestamp and verify it. And most of the time I can tell whether a picture is accurate or not. And just because of the way the picture looks. So for me, that's not an issue. For me, it's if the picture speaks to me and it is explanatory about the story. And a lot, I got to tell you something, Asher. I see the Chronicle. I still take the Chronicle and see the pictures in it every day. And I've noticed something about the young photographers on staff compared to the older veterans on staff of that paper. And the veterans, the older photographers, understand what it is to include and encapsulate the story elements in one image, whereas some of the younger ones haven't grasped that yet. They just tell me, this is what it looks like. They don't tell me anything deeper than that. The veterans kind of get into the story a little bit and says, this is why this story is important, and these are the elements why. That's important to me.
We got a lot of great questions coming in, Gary. So, and Lauren is unmuting people as they ask them. So Austin, would you like to ask your question and tell us where you're from?
Yeah, I'm from Texas, and I'm a student here in the city. So I've done photography for a few years, and photojournalism is something I'm interested in. So I was just wondering, sort of how you got into photojournalism initially and what your journey with that was like.
Well, my journey was like many journeys of the past, but I don't know about the journey these days. I mean, it's very, very difficult, and there are fewer jobs. The pathway that I took was I started at a small, at a college paper. Is where I really got interested. I was, I hate to tell you this, but I was really an engineer major, mathematics and chemistry, physics that I didn't do too well in. But photography kind of caught me, and I got on the student paper. From the student paper, my portfolio, it started to grow, and I got a summer internship with the local paper, the Sacramento Union. But at the time, I submitted a contest picture in the Kodak International Newspaper Snapshot Award, and I got an honorable mention. And the person judging that was the picture editor at the Sacramento Union, who then I had a connection with, and I said, I sent him my portfolio and had an interview with him and showed him that I'm interested in a summer position if they had one, and then they hired me, oddly enough, and they liked my work enough that I would go away to school, and then they called me up before the summer comes and says, "Are you coming back to the Chronicle?" I said, "Well, I don't know." And they said, "Well, why don't you know?" I says, "Well, no one's asked me." And he said, "Well, Gary, we're asking you to come back." I said, "I'm a little dense. I'm a little slow at times." And that was one of the slow times I've got. But from there, I went back to school after the second summer, and then graduated with a degree in journalism. And then they asked me to come back again for the third summer. And then after that, they said, "Why don't you just we have this intern program, 1-year intern program." And I said, "And we want you to be the first photo intern that we've ever had in the entire corporation." I said, "Well, sure. I'm not doing anything at the moment." So that's how I got my foot in the door. But then I started to connect with a lot of people, and apparently a lot of people liked my work during that time. And the Sacramento Bee was paying attention to it, and they were all the bee photographers I got to know. They were kind of, every time I showed up, they'd follow me around, get similar pictures that I was getting. And then the union was sold, and therefore my internship kind of ended. But the general manager came up to me and said, "Gary, I love your work, and I want to help you in your career. And if you give me your resume, I'm going to send it to a lot of the general managers I know across the country." And one was the Chronicle, LA Times, the Chicago paper, and Florida paper. But I kind of wanted to stay in California, so the Chronicle looked at my portfolio and liked it, and offered me a 2-week vacation relief. And I slept on the couch at my friend's place for a couple of weeks. And then before the second week was over, they asked me if I could stay for a couple more weeks. And a couple of weeks turned to a month, a month turned to a couple months. And went on for about 4 months. And then the managing editor came to me and said, or the chief photographer approached the managing editor and said, "We got to keep Gary. We got to keep Gary. He's such a nice guy. We love his work." And then the managing editor said, "Well, open up a space for him. Just add him to your crew. We'll figure out the funding later. And but you don't let him go." And that's how they came to me and said, "Gary, we are offering your full-time position." I said, "Cool. Do you want it?" And I said, "Well, I'm not doing anything." I'm like, "Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah." But it's much different these days. There are fewer staff positions. Well, let me put it this way, there were a few staff positions that time too. And I think what they saw was a lot of potential. And I just loved exploring everything. I was just, you know, I take the Lord with me everywhere I shoot, and I talk to him constantly. It's like, for me, it's like prayer without ceasing. And there are times that the Lord just opens up pictures to me that I would have never thought to be there. And it's kind of like, Lord, I don't see any pictures right now. Where are they? And he said, Gary, just be patient. And he said, and you would feel I would be so in tune with the Lord and talking to him about pictures. I said, I'd feel him nudge me to the left. And he said, Gary, move a little bit left. And I'll move a little bit left. And he said, oh, okay, too far. Move a little bit right. He says, okay, take a step right. And he says, Gary, watch this. And then he would move the clouds, he would move the sun, and the pictures would be right in front of me. And he says, just don't stand there, take some pictures. And I would take pictures, you know. And I should show you those pictures on another talk, but
well, Gary, that's actually a good segue to Mackenzie's question. I don't know if Mackenzie's can ask it. Can tell us where Mackenzie's from. Hello, Mackenzie. Well,
I talk too much.
Sorry, Mackenzie's my daughter's name. This is Eric Annis. I just figured out now how to change the name on there, but the last question that I had just asked was, you know, we see larger publications like the New York Times moving towards using freelance photojournalists rather than full-time staff. We also see the proliferation of citizen journalism where, you know, non-professionals are able to be published. It seems like a different world from the 80s and the 90s when, you know, many see that as the highlight of staff photojournalism at publications like the San Francisco Chronicle. So there's a lot of negative aspects to this change, especially from former staff photojournalists. But I just wanted to ask if you see any positives to this new phase in the profession, or do you have any advice to young photojournalists who want to get into the profession? That's the main question. The second question is just purely selfish. And I wanted to ask if you could share your screen again and show us, you know, at least 5 of your own personal photographs that you like, without, you know, much explanation, just for fun.
Let me see if I can find it, but let me back up for a moment. You know, so I've heard that people think that the 70s and 80s were a golden time of photography. Well, that's all a matter of perspective, because for me, it was the 40s and 50s that were the golden, and the 60s were the golden era of photojournalism. You know, with W. Gene Smith and Ernest Haas and you know, some of those, Neil Leifer and, you know, some of those guys. So you think I'm in a golden age because, well, I'm one golden, just old, but I think that golden age changes from decade to decade. So today will be a golden age for 20 years from now, when people are thinking now. To address the issue about how the staff, how pictures have changed, yeah, it's economics. People, you know, newspapers and publications have figured out that, you know, they don't have to bring on, you know, 30-member staff or whatever, because it can all be handled by independent guys who buy their own equipment, who insure their own cars, who have their own health insurance, you know, maybe they have their own health insurance and so forth. And I saw that coming, you know, with internet coming on, with all the advertising moving over to them, and less advertising over to publications and so forth. So I'm hoping that groups like Google and will take up the banner and say, you know, we need journalists, and we need publications like newspapers around the country just to be able to cover the news and give us the truth and accurate coverage. And I would hope that they would help supplement some of the publications. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but there has been talk about that. Now, the issue about how to find jobs these days, oh man, tough. One of the things that I know that has not changed is that people are always looking for exceptional talent. There may be fewer jobs, but there be jobs for people who are very versatile, very creative, and you can't find it anywhere else except for this person, that type of job. The reason why they're using a lot of amateur photographers is because they happen to be there because the news is happening right in front of them, and it's hard to beat. With you can't send a staffer to that location after the fact. You know, he doesn't connect that way. Let me see if I can find a few of the pictures here.
While you're queuing those up, Gary, why don't we hear from, we got a whole bunch of questions, so I want to try to get to as many as we can, if not all of them.
All right.
I see David McIntyre is on here, who I believe is another photojournalist and has a
Yes. He's a wonderful photographer. He's shot a lot of things for Genesis Photos, which we do. He's back from Hong Kong. He used to be our Hong Kong guy, our Asia guy. We would call him, but he has a different question. He's a brilliant guy, even though he says it himself.
Hi, Gary. My question is kind of a thing of, with cell phones and instant digital photos being in proliferation of Facebook and Instagram being in the public domain. What's your take on people probably not realizing the impact that their own photos, both personal and maybe with people in them, may have on them immediately or in the future? One of the examples is possibly like even the Capitol siege in DC, where a lot of people took photos, probably not thinking about the impact on them and others.
And that I'm really disturbed on the uprising and insurrection at the Capitol, but the pictures that they shot were was a record of what happened from a lot of different points of view. I think whenever people are taking pictures, they're in essence taking evidence, making evidence. And so if they're doing anything wrong and they're in the wrong place, so to speak, that's a detriment to them. But I do know that there was some journalists, in the Capitol building at the time that were, making, legitimate pictures, news pictures, and those pictures have gotten out, from Getty and some of the Washington Post, I think, was there, and a lot of them. That would be a difficult shoot to do. When you're a journalist, when you're targeted as a journalist with a camera, you're very vulnerable. And because when you've got a camera and they take the camera and beat you with it, so to speak, and they don't care, or they'll steal they'll steal it from you. So you have to kind of be very, very, you have to have eyes and back of you on the coverage. But I think the journalists who did coverage on there did a wonderful job. The amateurs and the insurrectionists who did their own pictures are finding that maybe we shouldn't have done all that. So I don't know if I can answer your question really well. That's very succinctly anyway.
Yeah, certainly a new can of worms that we're dealing with in newsrooms evaluating these kind of events. Is Kat still on the call? Kat DUQUE. I see a question from Kat.
Yep,
And
that's me. My name's Kat Dookie. So I'm a learning photojournalist, and I come out of a college newsroom in Clark College in Vancouver. So I'm used to searching for like photo assignments on an open campus where there's always interesting things happening, and or I'll have like an editor assign me to someone else's story. So I was wondering how you would recommend like I continue using those photojournalistic skills. Basically, like how do I find stories in my own community to take pictures of?
Listen for the story. Listen for what the story is about, and keep collecting your pictures and adding to your portfolio. When you put together a portfolio for a newspaper at any rate, there are basically 5 categories, and it's sports, it's news, picture stories, portraits, and features. Those are the basic 5. And if you have those together in your portfolio, as you get more, trade them out. You get better pictures, trade them out. So you're always improving your portfolio. These days, I used to carry a binder with a portfolio, or guys brought their exhibition prints for portfolios. And then later it became slides. These days, I think it's if you put up a web page with your pictures on it, that's probably a good way to show people. And you can show people around the world, around the country, and it doesn't cost anything, to put on the internet, so to speak. And you can trade them. Hopefully, you can trade them out from time to time. So that would be one way to approach it. Whenever I'm talking to photographers, I like to look at their work, and it's usually online. It says, "Give me an idea what your skill set is." Generally, in a couple of pictures, I can tell what their background is, and I used to be able to do it in one picture, but then, sometimes you get one picture and it's their best and only, and so one hit wonder. So I like to look at a series of pictures, and in all different categories.
Thanks for that question. I'm glad to see some student questions coming in. We got 2 or 3 more quick student questions here. One from Paige Hagee, one of my students at King's. Paige, are you on the call?
I am. Hello, my name's Paige. So I was wondering if the ushering in of digital photography impacts the importance of like each image a photographer captures, since they lose the limitations that film had, where a photographer could only take so many photos and they'd have to count their roll. So is there any value to the modern film photography? That was a second question. So did the ushering in of photography, digital photography, impact the importance of each image a photographer might capture, since you lose the limitations that film had, allowing a photographer to only take as many photos as they could with the film roll?
Let me answer that question backwards. When a photographer is limited to 36 exposures on a roll of film, that's a good way to stop motor drive coverage. In my mind, and I hate to say this, but when I moved everybody over to digital at the Chronicle, the limits came off on 36 exposures on a roll, and then they started machine gun everything. And then what happened is that I sense it when I was doing the edit, because it was instead of 300 pictures, I'm looking at 3,000 pictures to do an edit. And one, it frustrated the editor, and 2, it didn't help the photographer to concentrate on exactly what he was covering. When you had a limitation of 36 exposures, and you didn't want to run out of film, at the moment. And you never knew when that you were at 36 or 37 exposures if you're that. So you concentrated on the expression, on the moment, on the hand movement, and you made pictures exactly very thoughtful, very, very methodical. And for me, and for a lot of the other photographers, it was better to do it that way. I think they produce better pictures because of that. There's one story that 36 exposure limit. Steve Ringman was a photographer of the year, National Press Photographers photographer of the year twice. Only 2 guys or 3 guys have done it in the history of the NPPA. Pulitzer Prize winner Kim Kalmanich, side by side doing the coverage of Queen Elizabeth at the DeYoung Museum with President Ronald Reagan. They were set up on a camera stand. They were just photographing. Kim was like shooting like motor drive, everything. Then they had to change roles, put the role in. Ringman, on the other hand, was watching, waiting, moments. He had plenty of film in his camera. Ronald Reagan told this story that just broke the house down. The Queen laughed, almost fell backwards on her seat. That's the moment that Steve Ringman captured. And Kim Kalmanich was loading film in his camera at that moment. He didn't get it. Ringman did. The Examiner didn't get the picture. The Chronicle did, because he knew his limitations were of how many frames he had in his camera. So I think when you pick and choose the images you make better pictures, and that and because you never know when it's going to come. These days with motor drive, shooting everything, yeah, you can get it. Yeah, it has some advantages, but I don't know if your laptops can edit all that stuff on a deadline. That's really hard to do. So get a fast laptop, spend as much money as you can on speed on your laptop, and if you're going to do that. But if you're cheap like me, be very precise on what you shoot. Very, very precise. Make sure that everything in the frame is exactly what you want, and then make your exposure. I once put, just to do it, I think I was, younger than probably about your age at the time, and I was working at this Sacramento Union, and the union was really cheap on film, really cheap. They would give me 20 exposures, 20 exposure roll of film. I put 3 assignments on 120 roll of film and had extra. I didn't like to do that, but I did it just to do it. So be very particular. Joe Rosenthal uses 2 frames to get not only Pulitzer Prize, but picture that galvanized America on Iwo Mount Iwo Jima.
Great advice, Gary. Sandra Sanders, are you here to ask your question? Sandra Sanders.
I am. Hello. Gary, you mentioned earlier that there is a difference between taking a photo that says this is what the scene looks like and one that shows this is why the story is important. I was wondering if you could please expand on that. Like, what are some of the common elements in images that do tell that story and communicate its importance that tend to be missing in the photos that simply show a scene?
Let me explain that in a different way. When you're photographing a subject, a person, just photographing the subject, just showing what he looks like, he or she looks like, is one way to do it. And that's what a lot, that's showing like a 2-dimensional picture. But if you show him or her doing something, doing what they do, like a blacksmith, and he's forming his metal on the anvil, you can back up a little bit and get the motion and the action and the background of the blacksmith shop rather than just a mugshot. That's basically the difference. So when I get a mugshot of a person, okay, I know what he looks like. I can identify him on a police lineup, but I know nothing about him. But if you see this blacksmith shop in the background and his motion and him doing what he does and what he's known for, and why you're there for that story, you get a totally different impression on what on what the story's about. So does that make sense?
I think that makes a lot of sense, Gary. And I want to keep things moving so we can get as many questions. We'll go till 8:30. We're just 10 minutes away. So let's, we've got it looks like an international question from Nathalie Murillo. Are you here?
And by the way, you guys can email me your questions and I'll answer them.
Yeah, I am here. Can you hear me? I'm so sorry to interrupt. Can
Go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm from actually Wheaton College in Illinois, and my question has to do with definitely more of on an international lens. So my family is from Nicaragua, which is a borderline communist government, though they don't recognize it. And I've always felt that it's my calling to go there and expose the truth on like the governmental corruption that goes on. So I guess my question is, knowing that like the government even released a whole article on how if you end up taking pictures or really like release any type of photographs, you'll like have a lengthy prison sentence. So how do you kind of go about that and like be able to capture the truth when it's prohibited?
Well, that's hard because, I had a friend that was doing coverage in Central America of the drug lords, and they ended up, killing her boyfriend and chasing her out of country. And I mean, she's, I mean, that's decades ago when she was young and foolish, but she's still kind of young and, well, she's still foolish, but let me put it this way. I told every photographer that I sent to, that we sent to our Middle East, I said, no coverage is worth your life. No coverage is worth your life. You remember that. I'd rather have you home than get the story. But if you're in the middle of it, so you back off with a long lens, you do anything you can, but no coverage is worth your life. One, the editors will be mad at you because you can't file for deadline, and two, your wife will be, or your husband will be mad at you because whatever. But so you remember, no coverage is worth your life. There are some. One of my friends was doing coverage of Jonestown, and he lost his life in Jonestown during the People's Temple. Greg Robinson, and he was working for the Examiner at the time, but we were good friends, and very sad to go to his funeral. So I don't have good advice for you on that, but I do remember that when we were planning for Iraq, I said, well, we had weight restrictions on what the amount of gear we could take in. So I said, let me get you some smaller cameras that hopefully you can keep under your bag and keep hidden. And I told our management team who was holding the purse strings, and they came across it on the budget, so clandestine cameras. I said, yeah, I'd rather have the guys be low profile in Middle East than have their regular shooting gear and be targeted. And they said, makes perfect sense to us, and they approved the budget for that. So, so if you have to be in that situation, then just low profile.
Okay.
Stay in the shadows, stay in the background, know where your soldiers are, have eyes in back of you, and then just be fleet of feet if people are chasing you.
Gary, I see, I think we have 4 questions in 6 minutes, so let's see how well we can do. I see a
I
question.
try to shorten them up.
No, that you're doing well. We appreciate all these answers and discussion. I see a question from Nathalie's professor, Tim Morgan at Wheaton, if Tim's on the line.
Oh, he's my brother. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Gary, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you fine. You can email me
So
too.
excited, Gary, that you did this. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry we've been out of contact the last couple of years, but
It's not my fault.
well, could you just an open-ended question? Okay, rub it in. Could you just reflect a little bit about how I'm always fascinated about how journalism changes people who are the practitioners. So particularly talk about maybe just share about how photojournalism has changed you, particularly as a Christ follower. But a component of this really is how so many journalists end up in traumatic situations, and there's not always the resources available to them to help them overcome the witnessing of trauma.
Yeah, I haven't been in that situation much, and if I did, I probably blanked it out, which I probably have. But there is Stanley Leary and his wife, or his wife, basically has a ministry to specifically to journalists for exactly that. And I'm sure it happens, but I'm not a good one to ask on that. So, but if you want Stanley's information, I'll get it to you. Just email me accordingly.
Okay. Yeah. Just any other thoughts about how journalism and photojournalism has changed you as a Christian?
As me, I was a believer before I became a photographer. Matter of fact, when I was in engineering, at the time, I went to a Bible camp and I said, Lord, I want to give my life to you completely. And I prayed about that for a couple of weeks. And then I just had this overall impression that the Lord said, Gary, I want you to be a photographer. And I said, God, you are the creator of the world. You're the author of love. You're also the author of humor. Come on, let's be serious. I'm serious with you. And for the next couple of weeks, I prayed about that. And he said, Gary, I want you to be a photographer. And I said, Lord, if that's what you want me to do, I will do it. My life is like a blank piece of paper for you to write on what you want me to do, and I will do it. And that's kind of how I changed my major from engineering to journalism. And all I had been doing for my entire career had been walking through the doors that the Lord would open, and walking, and then the doors would close behind me. And and I walk in the next open door. That's all I've been doing. And just wherever he wanted me, that's where I would go. So for me, it was kind of 100%. This is God. All I want to do is serve you, doing whatever you want me to do. And that's it. It was simple for me. Complicated if you start thinking about it in different ways, but it was real simple. That's a simple formula for me.
And for those who don't know, Gary's kind of created networks of Christian people who do work in photojournalism, as I understand it. By the way, we've got 3 questions left, and there's 2 technical ones. So I suggest we have Ross ask his technical question, and then Brittany, and then close with Tom's question, Tom from Kenya. So Ross, are you here to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Just wondering, Gary, if you could give some thoughts on the effectiveness of black and white photojournalism in this age of color.
I prefer black and white because it eliminates one level of, or should I say it, black and white's filters out the color that sometimes interrupt the composition and the story and the way the story communicates. There are ways to, when I shoot black and white, well, I haven't shot black and white for decades, but when I used to shoot black and white, I used to have to think in black and white. And I'm thinking more about composition than I am about the color. I'm letting the color go where it goes. And in black and white, it's going to go gray. But I am always looking at the highlights and the contrast on it. So that's when I'm shooting black and white. When I'm shooting color, I'm reacting to the color, and the viewer is reacting to the color as well. And if the color is way off, like way tungsten, it interferes with the story, because people recognize, they don't filter that when they seeing it firsthand, because their brain doesn't recognize what tungsten is and what daylight is. But the color adds another dimension. The other dimension is motion, and yet another dimension is audio. And if you're doing journalistic coverage, you can use all those dimensions of composition, of color, of motion, of audio to get your story across, and get it across in different ways, in different realms. Big conversation on that. Go to the next question. We got.
We could sit for a long time, because some of these are both, they seem technical, but they're philosophical too. Brittany Bulai, are you here to ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, Brittany's
okay.
As well. Good to see you, Brittany.
Good to see you too. So I had a question, Gary, about watermarking. So if you're a freelance photographer and you take the photo and you own that image, what is your opinion on watermarking the image? Do you think it takes away from the photo composition, or would you still recommend it in terms of like ownership and to let people know that you own that photo?
Watermarking is nice. I haven't done it. We were going to implement it at the Chronicle, but the technology at the time wasn't really good. I think the last time I checked into watermarking, Adobe has it where it's invisible. In other words, it's all numbers behind the scenes. So you're not interrupting anything in the image itself. It's all data. These days, I think, if you can use it and it works for you, great, but I don't think a lot of people do. A lot of people depend on the metadata, the information that you put in the captions, and you put your copyright down there, and a lot of people can see it and understand it. And the legitimate people who want to buy your picture will contact you through that and recognize that this picture belongs to you. But to properly copyright it, you have to register it with a copyright office. And that's, every image or groups of images. I understand it's getting a little simpler now. It used to be very complicated. The Chronicle used to ship two Chronicle editions to a copyright information office every day, just to have it. So watermarking, if it's completely invisible and behind the image, sure.
Good, thank you. And Tom, are you still here? And you have the last question. And I'm thankful for everybody staying with us. Tom, I hear you.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone. Good morning from Nairobi. It's going to 4 a.m. and it's been very, very interesting. Gary, away from the technical things we've spoken about, I think the thing I'm taking away here is how you are infusing your faith into your work. I was literally blown away when you said sometimes you pray and you hear the Spirit of God telling you, stand where you are, and the clouds move, and God in his own providential way gets a great picture. I'm impressed. It shows how we can infuse our faith into our work, that God is interested even in taking picture of President Reagan, but God works everything. That's the lesson I'm taking away. Amen. And I'm really, really impressed. And the other thing I wanted to ask, I grew up watching people like Mohammed Amin, the famous Kenyan photographer. And I like black and white, like you've said. My question is there room for artistry in photojournalism anymore with all these technical gizmos people can play around with camera and angles and everything? And finally, if you could share your email address, maybe you can continue this conversation further. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, I think this artistry is still alive. You don't see it a lot, and a lot of people don't use it. My email is gary@genesisphotos.com, photos with an S, and you can look up the website. We just launched a new website this last week. And some people are, we don't tell a lot of people about it. We're kind of like a low profile group, but to answer your question, yeah, I think to have the art in journalism, in storytelling is equivalent to your poetic license when you're writing. And you should be able to use it and utilize it, and part of it is the visual balance and the way that balance will communicate to your reader instantly. And you should be able to look at a still picture, properly done, artistically done, and in an instant get a good part of that story, because the story elements are there, the composition is there, and it's speaking to you. It's grabbing you to hold you on the page. That's the mark of a good picture.
Well, I want to thank everybody for asking questions and for being here. I want to thank Lauren Davis for helping to run this Zoom webinar. And Gary, I especially want to thank you. I've enjoyed it so much, and seeing these images and your words and your thoughts and being part of this discussion tonight, I'm so grateful to you. And we'll put the video up there on our YouTube channel. We'll email everybody that as well, so you can watch this if you had to sign off early, etc. So thanks so much, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you all.